The blazing sun hung heavy over the Roman Empire, pouring its unrelenting heat onto cobblestone streets, grand villas, and the crowded insulae where most ordinary people lived. Imagine yourself stepping out onto the stone-paved roads of Rome at the height of July. The air is thick, shimmering with waves of heat that rise off the ground. The marble facades of temples and government buildings, beautiful in their gleam, only serve to reflect the sun's punishing rays back into the faces of those unlucky enough to pass by. Shade is a luxury, and those who cannot find it quickly discover that the Roman summer was no season of leisure, but a time of misery, struggle, and survival. For the wealthy, the solution was escape. Those with means abandoned the suffocating heat of the city for countryside villas near the sea, where breezes carried some relief. Senators and patricians fled to cool coastal retreats in Campania or the Bay of Naples, leaving behind the teeming masses of Rome to swelter in the stagnant air. The common folk, however, had no such privilege. Packed into cramped apartments, many lived on the upper floors of poorly ventilated buildings where the sun's heat collected like a furnace. Rooms turned into ovens, the air thick with the smell of sweat, stale food, and the ever-present stench of waste that lingered in alleyways. For these people, summer brought not rest but the constant fear of fire, sickness, and suffocation. The Tiber River, normally a source of life, became in summer a sluggish, reeking ribbon of water. Its banks swelled with mosquitoes, and its surface shimmered with filth dumped from the city above. In the stagnant heat, diseases spread quickly. Malaria, though not fully understood by Roman doctors, haunted the warmer months, and countless lives were claimed by fevers that struck down rich and poor alike. Physicians spoke of imbalanced humors, prescribing bloodletting, herbs, or prayers to the gods, but the sick often had little hope. Alongside disease, fire stalked the summers. A single spark from a cooking pot or oil lamp could send flames racing through the city's tightly packed wooden structures. Smoke choked the streets while panicked families fled with what few belongings they could carry. The Great Fire of 64 CE, during the reign of Nero, remains the most infamous, but smaller blazes plagued the city each summer, leaving destruction in their wake. Yet for all the fear and suffering, life did not stop. Markets still bustled in the mornings before the sun reached its peak. Bakers worked at night so bread would be ready by dawn, their ovens adding to the suffocating heat. Children splashed in public fountains, seeking relief in cool water, while vendors hawked diluted wine and cheap fruits meant to quench thirst, though the taste was often sour and unsatisfying. Even the public baths, normally a place of relaxation, became crowded refuges, their cool rooms offering at least a brief escape from the furnace outside. But relief was fleeting. When the afternoon sun reached its height, the streets emptied as shutters were drawn tight and people retreated indoors, praying for a breeze that rarely came. The hum of insects filled the silence, and the city seemed to hold its breath until evening. As night fell, life stirred once more. Romans emerged from their stifling homes, gathering in forums and taverns where the air finally cooled enough to breathe. Lamps flickered in the streets, laughter mixed with music, and the misery of the day was, for a few short hours, forgotten. Yet even in these moments, the weight of the season lingered, for tomorrow would bring the same blazing sun, the same suffocating heat, and the same fight to endure another Roman summer. The second wave of heat came not only from the relentless sun, but from the way Roman life itself was structured. The city was a marvel of engineering, but also a trap for those who lived within its stone walls during summer. The dense clusters of buildings held in the heat, and the narrow streets funneled hot air like a bellows. Roman writers themselves often complained about the oppressive atmosphere of the capital during this season, and for good reason. Even the grand aqueducts that carried water into the city could not wash away the discomfort. Public fountains overflowed, and citizens crowded around them, dipping their hands or splashing their faces. Yet the water often turned foul, and the constant press of bodies added to the suffocating weight of the season. Imagine standing in such a crowd, the smell of unwashed bodies mingling with the odor of rotting food and waste left to bake in the sun. For the poor, there was no escape. The laborers and slaves of Rome carried the greatest burden. Summer did not free them from toil. Fields outside the city demanded attention, and farmers worked under a sky that offered no mercy. Bent backs, parched throats, and cracked skin marked the season of harvests and planting. In the city, slaves carried water, hauled goods, or stoked the fires of kitchens and bakeries, their sweat dripping as endlessly as the tasks assigned to them. The heat did not excuse their duties, it merely made them harsher. Some collapsed from exhaustion, and many more lived each day with the knowledge that relief was not meant for them. To be poor in Rome was to endure summer as a punishment handed down by the gods. Festivals, which should have brought joy, often became trials. Crowds pressed together in public squares to watch games or theatrical performances, the excitement dampened by the sweltering air. The great amphitheaters, like the Colosseum, offered spectacles of gladiators and exotic beasts, but the blazing sun turned the stone seats into scorching slabs. Spectators shaded themselves with cloths or palm leaves, but many fainted or grew ill in the heat. Vendors sold watered wine to keep throats from drying, but for most, the pleasure of the games was dimmed by the misery of sitting under the unforgiving sky. Yet people still came, for in Rome, entertainment was not merely a pastime, it was a distraction from the hardships of life, even if those hardships were amplified by the very season in which they gathered. At night, when the air finally softened, the city seemed to wake from its fever. Romans filled the taverns and streets, clinging to the fleeting comfort of cooler hours. Musicians played, dice clattered across tables, and storytellers drew small crowds eager to forget the day's suffering. But even in the glow of torches and oil lamps, the reminders of misery lingered. The alleys carried the sickly sweet stench of decay, and mosquitoes buzzed relentlessly, biting exposed skin. Children whimpered in their sleep, restless from the day's stifling heat, while mothers fanned them with scraps of cloth. Fires smoldered in the distance, and the night was always haunted by the knowledge that the next day would be no different. Yet amidst this struggle, there was resilience. Romans adapted as best they could, structuring their days around the rhythms of the sun. Work shifted to early mornings and late evenings, meals became lighter, and people sought whatever fragments of comfort they could find. The misery of summer was shared by all, and in that shared experience lay a strange sense of community. Whether senator or slave, merchant or beggar, the burning heat of summer reminded everyone that nature could humble even the mightiest empire. As the summer dragged on, the misery of the heat settled into every corner of Roman life like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. By August, tempers grew short, food supplies began to spoil faster, and the city's rhythm slowed under the crushing weight of the sun. Bread, stored in cramped bakeries and homes, turned moldy within days. Meat, unless salted or smoked, rotted quickly, filling the air with a stench that drew flies and stray dogs. The lack of fresh food weakened the poor, leaving them more vulnerable to sickness. Physicians warned against the bad airs that seemed to rise from marshes and sewers during this time, convinced that the foul smell itself spread disease. Though their understanding of illness was flawed, their fears were not unfounded. Epidemics often surged in the hottest months, carried by mosquitoes and worsened by the squalid conditions in which so many lived. The wealthy insulated themselves from much of this suffering, retreating to villas by the sea or in the hills where breezes cooled the air and the worst of the city's stench was left behind. There, under shaded porticos, they dined on fresh fruits, oysters, and chilled wines, entertaining guests with music and poetry while the city sweltered without them. These retreats were not only about comfort but survival. To endure the summer in Rome was considered uncivilized if one had the means to escape. The divide between rich and poor was never more visible than in these months, when luxury estates blossomed with banquets while the crowded neighborhoods of the capital sweated in silence. But not all could abandon Rome. Officials, soldiers, and countless workers had to remain. For them, the summer became a season of endurance. Patrols dragged themselves through the streets, keeping watch for crime that rose with desperation. Bakers, unable to escape the city's ovens, kept the supply of bread flowing. Builders, craftsmen, and vendors endured the midday sun to keep daily life from collapsing entirely. These people, often unnamed in history, bore the true weight of the Roman summer. Their efforts kept the empire alive, even as they suffered the most from its seasonal cruelty. Yet despite the misery, the Romans found ways to endure and even to celebrate. Festivals tied to the harvest offered moments of joy, with offerings made to Ceres, goddess of agriculture, in the hope of abundant crops. Families gathered in shaded courtyards to share simple meals, children laughing as they splashed water over one another to beat the heat. Even in the crowded insulae, neighbors leaned out of windows to share stories across alleys, their voices rising with the hum of insects as night finally brought relief. In these fleeting moments, the harshness of the season softened, replaced by laughter, music, and the bonds of community. And when at last the summer began to wane, when the air cooled and the shadows stretched longer across the streets, Rome exhaled a collective sigh of relief. The markets filled once more with fresher food, the river ran faster with autumn rains, and people stepped out from their shaded homes without fear of collapse. The suffering of the season faded, though its memory lingered. To live through a Roman summer was to understand the fragile balance of survival in a city that, for all its grandeur, could not escape the power of nature. For the people of ancient Rome, summer was not a season of ease but a crucible of endurance, shaping their resilience as surely as their monuments shaped the skyline. And though centuries have passed, the story of their struggle under the merciless sun still reminds us that even the greatest empire was humbled each year by something as simple, and as powerful, as the heat of summer.